A skinny German shepherd was foraging for food in a garbage dump. Suddenly his ears perked up at a strange sound. A whimper. A baby's cry. He crept closer to the source of the sound, a newborn baby wrapped in a blanket. The dog barked once, and then Gabby's paws sank into the damp earth, each step a battle against the gnawing hunger clawing at his gut. The German shepherd's thick black and tan coat hung heavy with dirt, matted from days, or maybe weeks, of wandering. His pointed ears twitched at every rustle, and his once proud frame trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he sniffed the air, catching a faint, unfamiliar scent. Prey, his instincts kicking in like a switch flipped on. He dropped low, belly brushing the ground, and slunk through the tall grass, a shadow among shadows. The scent grew stronger, teasing his senses. His amber eyes narrowed, glinting like polished blades in the fading light. Every muscle tensed, ready to lunge. He'd been a fighter once, trained for combat, not scavenging. But that life was gone, abandoned like an old toy. Now, survival was all that mattered. He parted the grass with his snout, expecting a rabbit or a deer, something to silence the ache in his stomach. But what he found stopped him cold. A baby lay there, wrapped in a tattered blanket, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The infant's cries were weak, barely audible over the wind, but they pierced Gabby's ears like a siren. His jaws parted, saliva dripping as the predator in him roared to life. One bite and the hunger would end. Yet, as the baby's whimpers grew softer, something else stirred, maybe a flicker of memory from his old life, of protecting, not destroying. He froze, caught between two instincts warring inside him. Gabby shook his head as if to chase it away, but the baby's frail hand twitched, brushing the edge of the blanket. That tiny movement snapped something in him. He stepped closer, sniffing the child's matted hair, then lowered himself to the ground. His massive body curled around the bundle, shielding it from the chill creeping through the wilderness. The hunger still burned, a fire in his belly, but he ignored it, his gaze fixed on the infant's pale face. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Gabby's breath fogged in the cooling air, mingling with the baby's faint exhales. Nobody knew why the child was here, maybe left by someone who couldn't keep it, or lost in some tragedy. All he knew was the weight of this new duty settling on his shoulders, heavier than any command he'd ever followed. His ears flicked toward the distant howl of a coyote, a reminder of the dangers lurking beyond the grass, but for now it was just them. Two lost souls under a lonely sky, bound by a thread neither could name. Night clamped down like a heavy fist, the air turning sharp and brittle with cold. Gabby lay coiled around the baby, his coarse fur pressed tight against the shivering bundle. The infant's breaths came in quick, ragged puffs, each one a frail thread tethering it to life. He nudged the child closer with his muzzle, letting his own heat seep into its tiny frame. His stomach twisted, a hollow pit screaming for food, but he shoved the thought aside. The wilderness didn't care about hunger. It only tested the will to keep going. He couldn't stay here. The open ground left them exposed, easy pickings for whatever prowled the dark. Gabby rose, his leg stiff but steady, and gripped the edge of the baby's tattered blanket in his teeth. The fabric tasted of dirt and sweat, but he held it firm, dragging the child gently as he started to move. The terrain shifted underfoot. Rocky patches gave way to tangled roots, then back to soft soil that sucked at his paws. Wind sliced through the tall grass, carrying the faint hoot of an owl and the rustle of unseen things. He kept his head low, ears swiveling, tracking every sound. The ground dipped suddenly, and Gabby stumbled, nearly losing his grip on the blanket. He caught himself, claws digging into the earth, and glanced back. The baby whimpered, a soft protest against the jolt, but stayed nestled in its cocoon. Ahead, a faint gurgle broke the silence, the sound of water. His dry tongue rasped against his lips as he pushed forward, weaving through a thicket of thorny shrubs that snagged at his coat. The trickle grew into a steady hum, and soon he stood at the edge of a narrow stream, its surface glinting under a sliver of moon. Gabby dropped the blanket and dipped his head, lapping at the icy water. It hit his throat like a jolt, soothing the burn that had settled there. Then he paused, glancing at the baby. The child's lips were cracked, its breathing uneven. He dipped his snout again, letting water pool in his mouth, and shuffled back. Carefully, he tilted his head, dribbling a few drops onto the infant's mouth. The baby stirred, tongue flicking out instinctively, and Gabby repeated the motion, patient as a mother tending her pup. A faint coo escaped the child's lips, a spark of life that made his chest tighten with something he couldn't name. Water wasn't enough, though. They needed shelter, a real one, not just a patch of grass. Gabby scanned the darkness, nostrils flaring as he caught a whiff of pine and damp stone. He seized the blanket again and pressed on, the stream's murmur fading behind him. The ground sloped upward, littered with pebbles that skittered under his weight. After what felt like hours, he spotted it. A cluster of boulders huddled together, their jagged edges forming a shallow overhang. He dragged the baby beneath it, settling the bundle on a bed of dry leaves, then flopped down in front, his bulk blocking the wind. The night stretched on, vast and unyielding. Gabby's ears stayed sharp, catching the snap of a twig, the distant yip of a fox. His shoulder ached where thorns had grazed him, and his stomach growled louder than ever. But he didn't move. The baby's breathing steadied, a quiet rhythm against the chaos of the wild. He rested his head on his paws, eyes glinting in the dark, a sentinel carved from fur and bone. Whatever came next, hunger, cold, or worse, he'd face it. For now, this was their refuge, and he'd guard it with everything he had left. Dawn crept in slow and grey, a thin light seeping through the cracks of the boulder overhang. Gabby stirred, his joints creaking like old hinges as he lifted his head. The cold had sunk deep into his bones overnight, stiffening his limbs, but the baby's steady breathing kept him anchored. The infant's chest rose and fell, a fragile pulse of life against the stillness. He licked a crust of frost from his muzzle and stood, shaking off the ache. This rocky nook had held them through the night, but it wouldn't do for long, not with the wind picking up and the scent of rain on the horizon. He gripped the blanket's edge in his jaws, the fabric now stiff with dirt, and started moving again. The ground slanted upward, a steep hill coated in slick mud and loose stones. Gabby dug his claws in, hauling the baby behind him, each step a grind against gravity. His muscles quivered, straining under the weight of exhaustion, but he locked his eyes on the ridge ahead. The child's faint wheeze spurred him on. Every second out here was a gamble, and he wasn't about to lose. Mud caked his paws, splattering his chest as he clawed his way up, the blanket dragging like a stubborn shadow. At the crest, he dropped the bundle and panted, steam rising from his snout. Below stretched a shallow valley, and there, half hidden by pines, sat a weathered cabin, its roof sagging, windows dark. Hope flickered in his chest, a rare warmth cutting through the chill. He nosed the baby, checking its damp forehead, then grabbed the blanket to descend. But before he could take a step, a low snarl rippled through the air. His ears shot up and he spun around. 3 prairie wolves emerged from the brush, their eyes glinting like wet coals, ribs sharp beneath patchy fur. They'd smelled the same thing he had: weakness. Gabby eased the baby behind him, planting his paws wide. His hackles rose, a ridge of black and tan bristles, and a growl thundered from his chest, deep and guttural. The lead wolf lunged, jaws snapping, and Gabby met it head-on. Teeth clashed against teeth, a brutal dance of fur and fury. He sank his fangs into the wolf's shoulder, tasting blood, and shook his head fiercely, flinging the beast aside. A second wolf darted in, raking claws across his flank. But Gabby twisted mid-air, snapping his jaws shut on its ear and tearing free with a savage yank. The third wolf bolted for the blanket, its lean frame weaving low, but Gabby roared, a sound that echoed off the hill, and charged, slamming his shoulder into its ribs. The impact sent it sprawling, yelping as it hit the dirt. The first wolf came back, lunging for his throat, but Gabby ducked, seizing its foreleg in his teeth and crunching down until he felt bone give way. Pain flared as claws gouged his hind leg, a deep gash that made him stagger, but he whipped around, driving the second wolf back with a flurry of snaps and snarls, his blood-streaked muzzle a mask of defiance. The wolves hesitated, their snarls fading into whines as they backed away, bloodied and wary. Gabby stood his ground, chest heaving, crimson dripping from his side into the mud. They slunk off, vanishing into the trees, but the victory felt hollow. He limped to the baby, nosing it gently. The child was unharmed, its eyes fluttering open for the first time, meeting his. That look, trusting, unguarded, hit him harder than any claw. He grabbed the blanket and hobbled toward the cabin, each step a stab of agony. The door hung ajar, creaking as he shouldered it open. Inside, he set the baby on a dry patch of floorboards and collapsed across the threshold, a battered shield against the world outside. Blood pooled beneath him, but his gaze stayed fierce, locked on the growing light. They'd made it, for now. Sunlight spilled through the cabin's broken window, a pale beam cutting through the dust mote swirling in the air. Gabby lay sprawled across the threshold, his flank rising and falling with shallow breaths. Dried blood crusted his fur, the gash on his hind leg a jagged line of red against black and tan. The baby rested a few feet away, nestled on the floorboards, its tiny hands curled into fists. The quiet was a fragile thing, broken only by the creak of the wind against the sagging walls. Gabby's ears twitched, attuned to every sound, though his body screamed for rest. A crunch of gravel snapped him alert. His head jerked up, a low growl rumbling as he dragged himself upright, pain shooting through his wounded leg. He staggered to the baby, nudging it behind him with his snout, and faced the door. The footsteps grew louder, steady, deliberate, not the skittering of a predator. A shadow fell across the gap, and a woman stepped into view. She froze, hands raised, her hiking boots scuffed with mud. "Ooh, easy, big guy," she said, her voice soft but firm like she'd talked down wild things before. Her eyes flicked to the baby, widening with a mix of shock and awe. Gabby bared his teeth, his growl deepening, but she didn't flinch. She crouched low, keeping her palms open. "I'm not here to hurt you," she murmured, inching closer. "You've done something incredible, haven't you?" Her gaze softened as she studied the child, then him, piecing together the story written in blood and dirt. Gabby's ears flicked back, uncertainty gnawing at him. She reached into her pack, pulling out a water bottle, and poured some into her hand, offering it. He sniffed, then lapped at it, the coolness easing the rawness in his throat. She smiled, a small, shaky thing, and pulled out a radio. "This is Claire, mile marker 17. I've got a situation. Baby and a dog both need help. Hurry." Time blurred as the whine of engines approached. Gabby tensed as figures in bright vests spilled into the cabin, their voices overlapping in a chaotic hum. He snarled, planting himself over the baby, but Claire stepped between them, hands outstretched. "He's protecting it. Go slow," she warned. A man with a med kit knelt, speaking low and calm. "Hey, hero, we're here to help." They slid a blanket under the baby, lifting it gently, and Gabby's growl faltered as he saw the care in their movements. Another rescuer approached him, hands gloved, offering a strip of jerky. Hunger won out. He snatched it, chewing as they checked his wounds, their touch cautious but kind. The ride in the ambulance was a haze of lights and murmurs. Gabby lay on a stretcher, the baby cradled nearby in a paramedic's arms, wrapped in a clean thermal blanket. At the hospital, the chaos settled into a rhythm. Beeping machines, antiseptic smells, and gentle hands stitching his leg. A nurse slipped him a bowl of kibble and he ate, the gnawing void in his stomach finally easing. Word spread fast. A local news crew hovered outside, cameras flashing, voices buzzing about the dog who saved a child. In a quiet room down the hall, a couple sat by the baby's crib, their faces etched with wonder. The woman traced the infant's cheek, whispering, "You're our miracle." Her husband glanced at Gabby through the glass, his eyes catching on the bandaged warrior. "And you," he said under his breath. "Your family now." Gabby stretched out on a thick rug in the hospital's recovery room, the warmth of it seeping into his patched-up frame. His leg, now wrapped in clean bandages, throbbed less with each passing day. The bustle of nurses and doctors had faded to a gentle hum, and he watched them through half-closed eyes, their white coats a blur against the sterile walls. Beside him, in a crib with soft rails, the baby cooed, a sound that had grown stronger, brighter since the ambulance ride. Gabby's tail thumped once, a reflex to that little voice he'd fought so hard to keep alive. The door creaked open, and two figures stepped in, a man with a quiet stride and a woman whose hands fidgeted with a small stuffed bear. They paused, taking in the scene, the hulking German shepherd and the infant he'd guarded through hell. "That's him," the man said, his voice rough with something like reverence. The woman knelt, setting the bear by the crib, and looked at Gabby. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" she said, her smile wobbly but real. She reached out, hesitant, and when he didn't pull away, she scratched behind his ears. His eyes softened, a flicker of trust sparking where wariness once ruled. They'd been coming every day since the news broke. Tom and Lena, the couple who'd sat by the baby's side that first night. Lena had named the child Ellie, a name she'd whispered like a prayer while Tom filled out adoption papers. Today, they brought more than hope. Tom crouched beside Gabby, holding out a worn leather collar, its tag jingling faintly. "We've got a place for you too, buddy," he said. "Big yard, quiet street, room to run?" Lena lifted Ellie, letting her tiny fingers brush Gabby's fur. He nosed her hand, a soft huff escaping him, and the room seemed to glow with something unspoken, a bond sealed in that touch. Weeks later, the sun hung low over a tidy house on the edge of town, its golden rays spilling across a lawn dotted with dandelions. Gabby bounded after Ellie, now a giggling toddler with curls that bounced as she ran. She clutched a stick, waving it like a scepter, and he play-bowed, barking low, a sound more joy than warning. Lena watched from the porch, a mug of coffee steaming in her hands, her laughter mingling with the breeze. "Ellie, don't tire him out," she called, but her eyes shone with pride. Tom stepped out, tossing a ball that Gabby chased with a limping gait. His leg never quite the same, but strong enough for this life. The days blurred into a rhythm of small miracles. Ellie's first words, "Gabby," shouted with a grin. Nights by the fireplace where he sprawled as her pillow. Mornings when Tom slipped him scraps under the table. The scars on his flank faded beneath a glossy coat, and the wildness in his soul settled into something steady, rooted. One evening, as the sky turned pink and purple, Ellie plopped beside him on the grass, resting her head on his side. Lena snapped a photo, murmuring, "Our guardian angel." Gabby's eyes drifted shut, contentment washing over him like a tide. He'd been a fighter, a wanderer, a shield, but here, he was home. And so, from a shadow cast aside, Gabby became a light, not just for Ellie, but for a family built from broken pieces. His story whispered through the town, a quiet legend of loyalty and love, proof that even the roughest roads could lead to peace.